5 of the most vulnerable nations will see their GDP drop by 20% on average by 2050 and 64% by 2100 if the world rather heats up to 2.9 degrees Celsius. This is according to a report released by the COP26 climate talks in the Scottish city of Glasgow. The findings show that more than a third of the world's nations urgently need help to rebuild, or rather to build up resilience if their economies are to withstand the onslaught of heat waves, drought, floods and global warming. Here to talk to me about the link between climate and the economy is director and co-host at Ubuntu Economics, Sbu Nyathi. Sbu, good evening and thank you very much for your time and joining us tonight here on InFocus. Yeah, one would say the world is heating up, or the globe is heating up. This will affect the economies. How? What's the link?
Hi, good evening to you and good evening to your viewers. The link is basically things like livability. It will be difficult to live in places where there is extreme heat stress, and human beings need to be able to go out, to go work, and sometimes you will have flooding in places, and crops might not yield. There'll be a lot of instability, basically, and so things like inflation will hit the world, especially those places that suffer from the most impact caused by climate change. Yeah.
Is there something that countries can do to accelerate the transition into the green economy, particularly the African continent?
The African continent does not contribute as much as the developed world in terms of greenhouse emissions. We are basically bearing the sins of the globalized of the global north. So what can we do? We can only hope that countries like China and the US cut their emissions in half, and that they lend Africa the required resources to transition from energy sources like coal to renewable energy sources. So there's nothing basically that we can do. We are just at their mercy.
Yeah. So the overarching, sentiment there being that we're at the mercy of the developed nations who need to exercise a degree of caution in limiting their human-induced global warming, which means that they need to reduce their cumulative carbon dioxide emissions. But why is this such a difficult thing to do? Why do we need these big conferences like COP26 to sit with these countries to negotiate these issues? Are they not aware of the kind of destruction that this is bringing to the globe?
For the most part, they are aware, but there has been a lot of doubters. They doubted the science, say 2 decades ago, but now they know that the signs are there. I mean, China experienced a lot of flooding, tidal flooding this year. The US, there were those forest fires in the US and in Australia. I mean, Australia depends mainly on coal exports and things like that. So most of these countries do not want to transition as quickly as they should because there are economic benefits that they would have to lose some economic benefits. So it all hinges around commerce and trade. So that's where it is, yeah.
Yeah. Talk to me then about a tool like the Paris Agreement of 2015. How effective is that tool, and how is it being used, for example, to get countries to keep the global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius? And what would that really mean in real terms?
Basically, these conferences do not. There is no power behind them because countries were supposed to have a long time ago come up with binding resolutions. So there's nothing binding. I mean, just now, the past U.S. president, he just reneged on all of those agreements. So there is nothing binding. It is up to central banks and capital markets to sort of have a carrot and a stick kind of a methodology in sort of like not finance things like new coal plants, not finance development where there is or trade should be hindered from coming out of countries that are the most polluters. So it's the World Trade Organization, basically. Central banks and capital markets are our only hope. Yeah.
So what would deliver here a win-win situation in terms of principles of common but differentiated responsibility? As you are saying, the carbon emissions in Africa, quite honestly, compared to the bigger players, are not as severe. However, the problem is that the African continent will bear a heavier burden because of the lack of development and resources on the continent. So what would be a win-win situation here?
A win-win situation would be access to finance, access to capital markets for the African continent, so that we industrialize using new renewable technologies. We need for Africa to industrialize, and the global north needs to open up their markets, their capital markets, for Africa to industrialize in a proper manner. Yeah.
Is there a way in which policymakers can seize the kind of opportunity that has been brought on by the COVID-19 pandemic as far as disruption of the natural way in which we're doing things? I mean, you and I are having this interview right now online, even though there's load shedding on your end and it could not be on the video. But still, we have now moved from the natural way in which we used to do things to big on platforms like this.
When it comes to climate change, the only way I think, the only possible way would be making sure that factors like the ESG factors are come into play. The ESG means environmental, social, and governance factors. Those are factors that rating agencies have already started using in terms of rating sovereigns. Say a sovereign nation wants to get a loan. They use these ESG factors as a measure, as one of the tools in order to enable financing, development financing. So that's the main tool that is being used now, and South Africa is already starting to budget using the same ESG factors. Sort of like every department will have to say to give a report as to how their investments will impact on the environment, on social and governance factors. So that's the only tool, ESGs.
Sbu Nyathi, I appreciate your time and joining us tonight, director and co-host at Ubuntunomics, and of course the conversation around climate change, global warming. These are some of the big conversation being had currently at the COP26 conference, and money being put towards a just transition, particularly on the African continent. Some of those things and questions that are being asked at this conference.